6 or 3, 6, 9, 12 years alone, they're never alone, actually, because they're constantly in communion and in communication with the energies around them. And that's something that I've just always remarked on as quite powerful in our the sort of retreats that we offer. And I think a lot of people leave feeling like silence is actually their friend and a way to interconnect beyond the limits of what our projections and our ideas about self and other normally raise up.
The funny thing is that that's in all of our traditions.
Yeah.
Even Jesus said, those who worship the Father will worship. He did use the word Father. Okay, I'm sorry. But he said, but you worship in spirit and in truth. So there are no boundaries there. And so all of the teachings are to draw you into that internal space. And I have found in my ministry that being in nature, like Liz is, accelerates spiritual growth. And I would like to give one example. I put together an environmental arts camp for middle school age boys in 2005. And I took them from DC and put them on 80 acres of land. We invited some rural boys to come. It was kind of like a coming of age camp. And I ran them from 7 in the morning to 11 at night, because they were boys and they had a lot of energy and they were not getting away from me. Okay. So,
and you matched their energy?
Nature, that's the point. Nature matched their energy totally and completely. By the middle of the week, and we did change their diet. We took out the sugar and all that stuff. But by the middle of the week, they were running away from us. I had a male staff to work with them. They're running away from us, and we're like, what are they doing? What are they doing? And so we went to find them, and they were praying. They didn't want us to see them pray. Now, these were not all Christians. There were traditional African practitioners. There were Christians. There were Muslims. There were people who didn't have any religious exposure. All of these boys were just running around in nature together, having a good time, just exploring, experiencing the wonders of sunrise and sunset. And but in the middle of the day, they would run away from us to go pray. And we were like, oh my God. And so I was so struck by that, because I said, I'm doing all of my ministry in nature. Forget all of this waiting 20 years. No, if it works that quick in nature, I'm doing it that way. Because all this church stuff, forget it. So, what happened? I don't know what happened, but nature did it. And that's nature's job, is to do it. And so why are we trying to do something we can't do? We don't do it very well anyway, when there is this entity, this presence, this place that does it perfectly. And all of our scriptures tell us to go there and get your lessons. I sometimes say that all of the prophets were graduates of Mother Nature University. We forget that the old time they were priests, which meant that they understood natural things, and they had a special relationship. Even Solomon said he was wise because he was a botanist. Okay, and see, that piece we always leave off, that the wisdom, the template for humanity is in nature. And we ought to go there to learn about ourselves. Mm-hmm. And I often show pictures. I don't have them with me today, but our lungs, the branches of our lungs look like the branches of a tree. Lots of our organs resemble other things in nature, and that's so that we can see how is the healthy way. What is the healthy way to interact with that? The blood, our veins in our body resemble, a watershed. It looks like, rivers, right? So if we have this natural university that's already here for us, why don't we just study there, master that, master ourselves, And then we don't have to worry about mastering each other.
Can I just weigh in with a question? I'd love to hear your thoughts on both Liz and Rev Dele. And by the way, it's an absolute pleasure to be here and really appreciate it.
I remember you, yeah.
I remember you, and I feel like it's a wonderful reunion. I'm honored you nudged me to know about this. And
they spoke at the same conference a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and we were billeted together with some of your friends, Adam, and I see a few familiar faces, so really glad to be here. And sorry, Hannah, didn't mean to trump you, so I'll be quick and see what's next. But so I'm basically nodding with deep agreement with everything you're both saying, and I feel like I've traveled a very different path and arrived in this very same room. So a lot of deep resonance, zero argument, like all gates are just flying open. And at the same time, I notice, so I'm speaking to you from Montreal, Canada, which is a city, not the biggest city in the world, but pretty big one. And I'm kind of a city mouse, country mouse. I've been very blessed to spend a lot of time living in non-urban environments or spending extended periods of time in non-urban environments in different parts of the world, yet have mostly had a city address in a few different cities around the world. And I sense we often talk about going to nature. I don't think either one of you is promoting like nature is this other thing that we have to go to. Yet I think that is a common approach to sort of leave the denser urban environments to be in nature, to experience a lot of the exposure to more biodiverse environments. Actually, they may not technically be more biodiverse, but they feel that way. And yet I'm mindful that give or take 60% of the human population is going to be or is already in cities in the very near term. And I don't think we'll get where we want to go if a huge percentage of that crew sort of goes on a retreat in the woods or goes out. I hear so many peers, urban peers saying, I'm just going to go live in the woods. I think, first of all, you don't really know what you're proposing. And second of all, I kind of hope you don't, because the woods don't really need you right now. So one of the things I've been envisioning, and I'd love to hear your thoughts or steers, is when I look outside my window here in old Montreal, I see new condo builds, I see old heritage buildings, and I spend time trying to imagine what does it feel like when that resonance around our interconnectedness, where there really aren't the sort of edges we thought there were, are present even in urban places, and even where we live quite close and maybe have more of a built environment, because that is how we live these days. And maybe in 6 generations we've evolved out of that, but in this generation as we move forward. And so I spend time provoking myself to imagine, how does that look and feel? What do I do differently? What looks different around me? But I'd really love to hear your thoughts about connecting across all of these planes, even where most of us actually live.
Reverend Dele?
And that's to either one of you or both, as you.
I just have one comment. In Thailand, I think it is, I've seen pictures of in major cities in Thailand where they have brought nature in, where there are, they create forests for the electric trains to go through, you know, like the metro, the subway, it goes through a forest. And I've seen atriums that are like rainforests, like, you know, like we have shopping malls, and we, you know, we do put a few trees, but I mean, theirs is like really lush. And I have seen them growing literally gardens on the side of their house. You talk about vertical gardening. I've seen it, and that might be one, you know, one interim step, because at least you have integrated species living together. And when that happens, Mother Nature comes in and gives you extra. Or like our grandparents used to say, well, those volunteer plants, they didn't call them weeds, they said they're volunteers. Because you also find that plants will come to you if you have a medical condition that plant can heal. I've been on herbal walks with naturopathic doctors, and they'll say, oh yes, we went to go visit so-and-so who had diabetes, and they, you know, they had this burdock in the front. They had all the herbal plants that person needed. And they said, oh, you're growing such and such. And the person said, no, that's just a weed. It just came here. That's
That, I mean, I have to admit that also came to my mind was especially this gardens on rooftops that I've seen a lot of pictures of. But I would say that even without that degree of, you know, consciously bringing, so to speak, nature into the cities or into urban areas, that, I mean, when I lived in New York City for a period of time, and there was something extremely powerful about the existing green spaces that were already there. And even just the ability to walk out the door and to look up into the sky. You know, nature is constantly permeating us, no matter where we are, whether we're in the remote mountains or we're in the urban areas. And when I lived in New York, I spent a lot of time in the parks, which were incredible places to just be, and to somehow it was so interesting too to be in nature in the city. You know, there was something very very interwoven about that experience, even though normally I would be the kind of person who would tend to want to say, no, concrete, cement, etc. That's not part of my, that's not where I'm comfortable. That's not what I want to feel. And yet it didn't feel discordant. There didn't feel like there was some enormous kind of contrast. Because everything that we're involved in is composed of the same fundamental elements, whether they're come together in the form of a, you know, a concrete sidewalk, or they are manifested in a huge old oak tree. There's still this coming together of these elemental energies. And I think that if we are sensing into deeper levels of interconnectedness, that we don't have to feel that a urban environment is an impediment to being connected and to
So
being
maybe you can help me a bit here. I grew up in New York City, and if you ever saw the movie West Side Story, that was where I grew up. And I frequented Riverside Drive Park and Central Park, and I never felt connected to nature there.
Do you know
And
why?
do I know why?
Yeah.
It just was not part of growing up in tenements, at least in the ones that I grew up in. Yeah,
Well,
and to this day, I am more comfortable in the city than I am in the woods,
right,
and I wish I weren't.
right,
But you know, early childhood experiences and all of that,
sure,
and there just wasn't anything that I perceived as nature there. I had a pet cat, and
right,
there were grasses growing up in between the cracks in the sidewalks. But Central Park and Riverside Drive, I mean, these are very manicured imitations of the natural world. And they touch me as a nice place to go play basketball. But beyond that, you know, Richard Louv has a book called The Last Child in the Woods. And I was the child after the last child in the woods. And so it's an ongoing issue for me. And maybe in the past 15 years or so, I've been overcompensating is a terrible word for this, but you know, I've been indulging in really learning a lot more about the so-called natural world. And I think there is a very big difference between cities and outside of cities. And Lorraine, I question whether it will be possible to continue to have cities at the level that we have them. And I think the coronavirus is certainly an illustration of what happens with that kind of population density. But there are all kinds of other reasons. I mean, cities are the breeding ground of externalities. Cities just suck in resources from miles, if not continents around, and that is completely unsustainable, and it's artificially supported in so many ways. I mean, it's like driving a car with gasoline. The car runs fine till the moment the gas runs out. And I think that's what we're in.
I think that, you know, as with the coronavirus, it's giving us a chance to rethink everything, especially cities. And yeah, rooftop gardens are a great example of how we can bring permaculture and nature and food production to the cities. I think that also, especially for the people trapped in the cities and not able to get outside right now, they're experiencing nature deficit disorder at such a large scale. That people are really realizing how important that connection to nature is. I do worry about all the animals that are going into the cities and stuff, and even in Yosemite, once humans start coming back, it's going to be some clashes, but hopefully not. I just wanted to make a few points, and then, yeah, see about this discussion of really pulling together the choir. And so I'm really excited to learn more about your work, and from this talk today. I mentioned in the chat in the main room, I'm starting an effort called the House of Gaia, just to be like a spiritual community, to invite people at these times as we're separated. It's been a vision for many years, but for now, just to give people ways to connect, even if they're stuck in an apartment building, you know, commune with the plants that are next to you. I guess you can't see that, but and pictures, and just ways to tap into nature as much as we can, and the healing power of it, and normalizing our nature-based spirituality as much as we can. And I just want to share with this group, because I think you'd all be interested, if you're not familiar with Alexander von Humboldt, there is this amazing book called The Invention of Nature. Sorry, weird screens here.
Got your virtual
There we
background
go.
going on.
By Andrea Wolf. And Alexander von Humboldt in 1800 came from Europe to South America, and he is the first one to notice human-induced climate change, talked about it in 1800. He's the first one to talk about the Gaia theory and realize that Earth is one big, living, united system. And he studied all of the sciences and brought them together in a holistic manner, realizing that's how the world worked. But he talked about the importance of being in nature, and that you can't just study it from a laboratory. You have to be there, you have to commune with it, and spoke of the spiritual importance of that and how it fed the soul. And it's just such great lessons for us today. And so I just wanted to share that with you, because I think that you would appreciate this book and his lessons, and just ways that we can all learn these different things from the past to include in our modern traditions and moving forward. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to connecting with a lot more of you on this.
Okay, yeah, I think that's the Spirit of Resilience is a media project that we're lifting up to have these kinds of conversations. So if you go to spiritofresilience.com and sign up for the email list, then this will be at least one platform where we can have some conversations. Hilda had a question that she wanted us to discuss. Do you want to lift it up? You want to unmute yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Lama Liz, I've had the pleasure of being with you in person and recently in this context, and I must say I'm thriving despite the circumstances. And Reverend Dele, it's an honor to meet you. And I really related to the when you mentioned how we're sort of disobedient children who are like, I know better. You know, I'll do better. I have two children. I have a 9 and a 11-year-old.
And
they frequently know better. And then I told you so. So I enjoyed the conversation. I grew up Lutheran, so I was a very religious child, and it really served me well in difficult circumstances. I prayed to him for a long time. And then I became, in my 20s, a feminist. so him became her. And I think now at 46, I'm more like drawn towards the non-gender spirituality. But I do see the need, and I worked with Three Sisters for a few years very actively, and we were criticized for calling ourselves Three Sisters because you know, we should all be reforesting the tropics. So I'm very curious about whether or not we should feminize Mother Earth, or if we're ready to be non-gender in that conversation, because there's so much healing that still needs to take place in terms of even as women, even me, I'm constantly decolonizing my own view and trying to work towards nurturing the feminine within me. I came from a very strong scientific background and a very sort of patriarchal upbringing that I often find myself act more male than female. And as a mother, I do use the teachings, and I really rely on the teaching on as recently Lama Liz and Lama Villa in terms of understanding how naming things can actually harm the experience of it, and the more experiential, non-conceptual view in experiencing reality. I'd love to have a conversation about that. If
I don't know, as someone who has gone through a variety of spiritual traditions, not because I was seeking a truth, but because, like I said, I started reading the Bible at a very early age. And by the time I read the Bible through probably about 4 times before I was 16. And then I was ready to see the implementation of what the Bible said. I want, well, what are, you know, these are some wonderful things going on in here. Where is it happening? You know, it's not in the church. And so I was sent, you know, I'm, you know, and I have to use that language. I come from a very strong, you know, 6 generations of very strong spiritual leaders. And I feel like I was sent to different places, to different spiritual communities, to find the truth of what I was, of what had been expressed in my own. And so I have studied in traditional African religions, you know, to learn certain things. I have been to the Unitarian Church to learn certain things. I have been to Islam. I studied that, you know, and to learn certain things. And so, my Buddhist experience is when I was in doing my Katrina response work, a Buddhist, and I forget the name of, it's not a temple, but it's not a Sangha, hermitage, okay, invited me to come there for respite. And so, you know, I always like to be a respectful participant. So I went, you know, and, you know, went to the teaching sessions and went to the meditation sessions. And so every environment that I've been in added a piece to my puzzle. And so I like to encourage people to say, well, look at it as a continuum. I'm personally not ready to throw away the male and the female. It's like, well, you know, they're both there. Can't we just have it all? I just, you know, okay, you don't want to say, because it's just a word that we create to describe the essence of something that we can't describe anyway. It's just a word, you know. And if that word doesn't serve you anymore, well, the essence isn't going to go away. So the point is, how do we maintain a system that creates the fullness of the essences so that we can all grow and mature? You know, that's really the point. It's like, you're not, you know, you don't eat a meal all at once. I mean, you eat, you know, first you're going to eat, you know, your rice and your veg, you know, you don't put it all in your mouth at the same time. So there's nothing wrong with saying, okay, I'm going to take this little piece here and this little, but understand that it's part of a continuum. It's part of a whole system. I think that's where I see difficulty, is that when we go into to really learn and master the individual pieces that we need to master, we forget that it's still part of a whole that we don't really understand very well. So that's all I would say.
No, we work with what's called like the permaqueer and the queer ecologies and different LGBTQ communities that are very close to nature, mostly through regenerative ag, but other aspects too. And yeah, humans aren't claiming so much of this male-female anymore and realizing it is more of a joint union in a lot of people, and I think the same with nature. And so looking at our languaging around it like that too, and there is a lot of power in this discussion, I think.
Liz, where are
And
you on that male-female continuum?
Well, when I can't remember the woman who spoke up during our panel at the end when she was expressing this, but it's definitely true that in my I resisted for a very long time the sense that I should somehow make a stand as in opposition to, for example, to take a stand as a feminist in opposition to men.
Do that.
Because it just always felt like, oops, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's not that I don't 100% believe in the power of women, and that women have been put in a position where it's been impossible. It's for many, many reasons that it's become systematized for them to be seen on an equal basis. Of course, I mean, that's deeply, deeply part of me, but it felt like just another way of polarizing a situation that was already in a really terrible shape. And one of the things that, even though we're sitting here talking about the divine feminine, I'm actually holding a class right now on Monday evenings on kind of reinvigorating the energy of the divine feminine. And it's been a lot of people quite interested in bringing forward these energies that have been sort of systematically pushed down in a certain sense. But I would say that, within the tradition that I've kind of found a home in, this Tibetan Buddhist tradition, what you really see as the basic ground is non-dualism, the sense of non-duality. And within that frame, there is no separation between feminine and masculine energies, shall we say, that they are intimately interwoven in such a way that they cannot be teased apart. They cannot be, and that in order for there to be a fully matured or enlightened, so to speak, human experience, that we need, that all of those energies need to be fully ripened and developed, so that the path is somewhat a journey of beginning to bring forward what hasn't been noticed yet in one's own experience and in one's own being. And so I also have resisted this language of male, female, masculine, feminine, and yet of course I also see the need for, as Hannah was just saying, that there needs to be, or no, Hildur was saying, there definitely needs to be this rebalancing, and I think that we're moving closer to that kind of experience on some levels, but there's still a long way to go.
But there's also a marked difference between men and women, and it's not just physical bodies. And to me, that's a very enriching experience, because I go beyond my, it's not a great word for it, but go beyond my innate experiences of being a man. And I mean, in indigenous cultures, as far as I know, there's always that differentiation in between men and women's roles in the culture, and that may vary a lot from culture to culture, but the differences are in some ways are very distinct. The obvious ones are bearing children, but there's all kinds of things that go along with that, and in brain function in certain ways. And I mean, the problem comes when we obviously draw distinctions on the basis of cultural prejudice that really aren't there, or that aren't what we make them out to be. But the complementarity is kind of essential and quintessential. And I think in this culture and in civilizations in general, we deal with it very poorly. But the differences are there, and I think it has to be.
I'd like to speak to some of the indigenous sense of male and female.
Please do.
Because it's kind of like both and, okay, rather than either or.
Right.
You have cultures that first of all kind of taught, this, how to properly manage the male energies and how to properly manage female energies. And in addition to what your social role was in society, that was one thing. But in spiritual practice, in ceremony, you might adopt an energy that's totally different than yours. So again, I'm just speaking from the African perspective. When you have this whole spirit possession piece, you might have a man who always possesses what is considered a feminine spirit. Or you might have a woman who always possesses what is considered a male spirit. And so within that context of ritual ceremony, they're taught to balance that. And then they're given messages from the unseen world that then goes out to the community. How can the community balance this? You're learning how to do it within your body. You're learning, and again, you're learning something that goes beyond words. So I don't really have a lot of words for it. But these are cultures that understood there was more than male separation and females over here. And so they provided spaces for that blending to come together. We hear, or there's books now about in the Native American presence here in this country, where they have 5 genders, and you might have a cross-dresser. And they didn't get upset about cross-dressers, because they said, well, okay, you're a cross-dresser, but you're man, but you're going to be married to somebody, so do that and do this. So it was more both and rather than either or. And when the elders discerned that a particular child had more than one spirit, again, they call them two-spirit people. And they took them, and that person had a special role in society. They had a sacred role in society. They were not ostracized or abused or, cast out. It says, okay, you have a special message for us, and we want you to, and there was special preparation for them. So again, there's a rainbow of experiences of how to manage, what we perceive as separate.
And I would say too, there's a way in which, what you had to say, Adam, is there's certainly truth to that. There certainly is a differentiation between the way energy unfolds in the world, and male dominated, or shall we say masculine energy, has a certain kind of texture, and it has certain capabilities, and the same thing with feminine energy,
purpose.
And but on the relative level, it's important to recognize those differences and to find ways to see them in balance, and at the same time to also recognize their distinctiveness, and that each has particular functions that are necessary for the for the survival of the species, for the actually maybe even for the survival of the planet, quite possibly. At least in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, there's also the level of, there's the relative level, and then what we call the ultimate level, which would be more the level at which that goes deeper than these distinctions, and that recognizes that there's a much more basic source from which these energies are arising, and that if we could abide in that source, which we might call the nature of the mind or the nature of the heart-mind, that in that space, and it's not that anyone sort of walks around acting out of that space in a kind of like, oh, well, I don't care anymore about these differentiations. No, these two things are intimately, they're not separate at all. But there's a recognition that actually at the core, then such dualisms don't serve the awakening of the human being. That the human being, and on a certain level, has to recognize at the deepest level that there is this kind of differentiation, this dualistic way of thinking about one thing versus another thing, and even the way our language itself causes this kind of a separation. It's interesting, for example, in the Tibetan language, or let's say in the English language, let's start with that, the way that our grammar is structured. You have something like the subject, I, and the subject wants to talk about its experience. And so the subject says, I am afraid, I am angry, I equals this experience. In Tibetan, the actual language itself, or the grammar of the language, is entirely different. Instead of there being this I equals something, there's simply such and such an experience is present. So fear is present, anger is present. And the dichotomy, this sort of subject-object dualistic split, isn't built into the language itself. So there's just a sense of something is arising, experience is arising, but it's not immediately bifurcated into a subject-object dualistic frame. And I think that, this is at least my sense of the understanding of, in many ways, what Buddhist practice is about. And many, I think, mystical traditions, and I also spent quite a lot of time studying other religious traditions and trying to be part of them as much as I could, that on that, there's the same kind of understanding on the deepest level. Even the notion of God, if we can get beyond this sort of way that it's this particular energy has been sort of historically gendered, then, and I think many people have gotten beyond that and had an experience of God that is not a gendered experience.
I think I'd like to talk about the language just a little bit. We all have to remember that English is a baby language. It's it's maybe 700 years old, something like that. And the language came out of war. It came out of it was just a language that was patched together. And so, whereas some of your more ancient languages, if you go and ask them, where did your language come from? They say it was divinely revealed. It was, the essence gave it to them. And so you find that the way your language comes to you does create a mental construct that then you begin to live out. And we can recognize that we can be greater than the English language, particularly if we study other languages. Mm-hmm. I loved studying Kiswahili, because they had categories of nouns and verbs related to nature. And so whenever you put a sentence together, you had to put creation back together in the way that the grammar is created. And I always found that just kind of, it was very poetic and very nourishing. And it also speaks to why we find translation to be difficult, because in the English language, again, being a baby language, it's like a baby, it's like a toddler. It's not, it's a toddler is not stable, isn't it? It does. And so this language has the same properties. It doesn't flow, like your ancient languages. They're very comfortable with layers of meaning for one word. And that's something we can learn from, Yeah.
I'd love to build on that if I can. As language is an area I've spent a lot of time thinking about in relation to this, and I don't speak Swahili or any languages that are not pretty close to English, so other Romance languages or languages that use the same alphabet. But one of the things that I've realized in learning languages and speaking them and then exploring, let's say, this theme, I guess two nuggets I'll share in case they're useful. One is that I think in particular in English, in our Western culture, I'll use a bunch of boxes just to use relatively familiar labels. By the way, hi Paula, I see you there. It's fun to see you. It's great to see you. We really want to label things. And there was the comment earlier, I think that perhaps coming from something you had said, Liz, around the danger of labeling. And I think there's that. And then there's also just this habit that's a constraint. And so, you know, is it Mother Earth or is it just Earth? Is it Mother Nature or is it just nature? Is it even nature? You know, we want to give labels. And I think in some ways that makes sense because we want to communicate with one another. And if I use a word that you've never heard of, then you don't know what I mean. So there's a logic to the labeling that we are, I think, from a largely mechanistic analytical worldview that most of us have been cultured and trained in, are a little bit, we're used to that. It's our kind of mental muscular rut, and it serves a great purpose, just as male energy serves a great purpose and female energy, you know. So I don't think we want to entirely throw it out, but I think we want to be aware of it and ask ourselves, is it useful to demand a label here? And sometimes I think it is useful, and then other times maybe it's not. So I think of that as like something to play with or query. And then the other little nugget that I sort of torment myself or liberate myself with is that I think of the alphabet, the one that I use in English, this 26 letter string we have, as the most wonderful random accident. But it's also a piece of open source code that we can choose to use or not. And so we have these 26 letters. I'm speaking to you in English. I'm using those letters to use those words to speak to you now. But they're just 26 letters. And as we know with other languages that don't use this alphabet, there's an infinite array of possibilities of organizing ink squiggles or, you know, or the sense of those ink squiggles. And we're choosing these ones to have this conversation now. But imagine just how many more pieces of other open source code that we haven't picked up yet are all around us. And then I imagine, well, what would a label be then? You know, because the notion of divine feminine, as I'm understanding Liz and Rev Dele lifting it up, I don't hear you saying to me, look, nature is female and we just need to get that into our heads and then we'll be so much better. I hear you reminding me to respect the energy that has been a little disrespected. Her voice isn't being heard, as you said earlier, Rev Dele. So listening to that voice, not because it's labeled feminine, but because it's a really important voice. So I guess I'm kind of advocating for, maybe labels serve us sometimes, and then we do need to question them and reject them when they aren't helping. And there's this world beyond labels that we are not capable of saying because it has no label, which I think is really fun.
Thank you.
Hilda wanted to mention something. She wanted to give us a word of encouragement. You still want to do that?
Well, yesterday my kids got the news that they can't go back to school. They're not the homeschooling types. They're very, they love their public school. They just love going to school. And they just heard that we have another couple of weeks of homeschooling. And it's not like we can homeschool and sort of, we're on Long Island, so it's very populated and it feels a little stifling. The public, the parks, even the preserves are closed, and so it's limited in essence. But we've really made good use of this time with planting. And just yesterday, as we were kneeling down and just looking at the geraniums that just are starting to bloom, and the purple little flowers, and we were just looking really close. And then my daughter said, a 4-leaf clover. And there it was on the perfect timing. And so we're pressing the 4-leaf clover, and we're gonna, and so right here in our little, we don't have a big back or front yard, but we made good use of planting vegetables and flowers, and we were gifted with an encouragement of good fortune.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
So on that note, everyone, I'm sorry, but I actually have to leave our group. I am supposed to be part of another conference, and I put them off for at least an hour, but I really need to go. So I wanted to thank you all very much for your interest.
Undoubtedly have a long way to travel.
Well, that's the good thing, right? I would have had to leave a lot earlier if I had to actually go somewhere.
Thank you so much, Liz.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Thank you,
And Reverend Dele, thank you so much for being in a conversation with me about this, and for all of you for joining in that conversation.
Yeah,
And
to be continued. Absolutely.
absolutely, to be continued. I hope that I see you all again and get to continue these kinds of conversations, because they're really very fertile and inspiring, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think it's going to become a much larger part of what Bio4Climate is doing.
Wonderful.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, I look forward to hearing more about that.
Yay.
So many blessings to all of you. And
Okay.
may you have a wonderful rest of the weekend.
Okay.
Thank
And
you.
to you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I just wanted to quickly share a thought about the languaging, because I used to have this book that was fascinated about the power of language, and how as language went extinct, then the culture was lost, and we're losing so many languages so fast, and really what a loss that is to human nature, and especially these indigenous cultures. And so it makes me think, as we kind of develop or open up our inspiration or whatever it is to share more languaging around earth-based spirituality, that the more we speak it and bring it into existence, the more it will just kind of create this new language and be a platform to invite the choir in, and then other people and everything. So
Okay, so I kind of hear you saying there might be a time, this might be a moment in time when we are all encouraged and invited to redraft our language, or revise, refine our language, and to be very intentional and therefore consistent. So if we find a concept that is not being practiced, let's create a phrase and then tell all our friends about the phrase and
speak it into existence, the word. And then
exactly.
the word.
I think this is a time to speak into existence other ways of relating to each other, other ways of relating to our natural world. So this is the moment, and I guess we need to help each other. Yeah.
Resilience is my favorite word. There you go.
Okay.
Yes. Nothing. And it's just starting to rain outside, so that's a blessing.
Oh, refreshment.
Yes, from nature.
So just to perform a semblance of official duty here.
Yeah, I think we're wrapping up.
Yeah, and people can stay and chat if they want, or go back to the main room. I think you have a button that says leave breakout room. So that'll put you back into the main discussion if you want to go there.
Okay. Any other, Julie, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just, years ago, I read something by Shakti Goin, and it has always stuck with me about how the masculine and feminine, which is within each of us, that it's like the masculine is driving the car, but the feminine is being the navigator.
Right.
And it's really important for the masculine to really listen to the guidance of the feminine, because it won't know where it's going. It'll drive too fast. It's that idea of kind of the feminine allowing the masculine to kind of be the driving force, and then the feminine really being the leader, and the masculine honoring that. And I've often felt that again, just this whole idea of balance, and that we can't get away from the fact that we are men and women, but I think the transgender movement is really showing us how that is kind of fluid. I think that's pretty cool that a lot of young people are experimenting a little bit with what does it mean to be masculine and feminine. But I grew up in a Christian tradition, and Martha and Mary are such a great example. I love Martha and Mary, because it's like the contemplative and the contemplative aspect,
the activist,
and the active, and the idea that like without Martha, no one's going to eat.
How about that?
And she gets a kind of a bad rap sometimes, but but the thing is, if Martha cooks and makes that dinner without pausing for a moment and appreciating where the ingredients came from, and being grateful for the fact that she gets to cook because maybe she's good at it, and Mary's not going to do it, but then food isn't going to taste as good because it's going to be made with, because Martha's kind of crabby about it, like, why, Mary, are you doing that thing anyway? So I just think the whole paradox and yin yang, masculine and feminine, I think it's helpful. It's helpful for us to think about it. And I appreciate that we call Mother Nature because, in some ways that it is this wrapping around, but we can accept that as you think about the daddy. My husband is so good with our daughters, Anyway, thanks for listening here.
No, I think it's important. I think all of us we just keep bringing up the need for fluidity and the need to respect the purpose of, whatever your entity, whatever your role, there is a purpose for that. And I think if we can respect that all these manifestations have a legitimate purpose, then we can be more respectful and, and maybe learn something. I don't know. Sounds like we're winding down.
Yeah. I do want to just acknowledge Happy Beltane, good pagan holiday for celebrating the fertility and the feminine of nature and the union. This is really about the union of the masculine and feminine. And that's why we tie the maypoles and celebrate all the coming together to love each other in springtime. So happy Beltane.
Okay. Well, thank you. So do we want to leave, or what are we just kind of suspended. We're in that suspended moment.
I was distracted earlier.
This is what it feels like to be in cyberspace.
All of these flowers were going to be their Star of Bethlehem, and they were all going to be mowed down because they just grow like crazy in the yard. And so I just, while we were chatting, so that's why I was moving around. And
thank you for sharing.
Yes, my husband was mowing a lawn, and I was out there trying to get
saving the flower. Oh, that's funny.
They were mowed down. I'll put them all over the house.
Oh, that's sweet.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much, and hope to see you in the next 2 sessions, 2 more Saturdays to go. And I think today was just wonderful. Thank you, Dele.
Thank you.
And everybody else.
Yes.
So I'm going to head back to the main room.
I am too. Yeah. I have other things I'm supposed to do today, believe it or not.
I don't believe that you made that up.
Okay, so peace.
Hildor.